Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever it may be to you. We're coming back on this upper partial and we're going to jump right in. Um, this particular one has some attachments. So we have the three locators here, and these we're just simply going to go around with our meshwork. But first off, like we normally do, we're going to look right at our path of insertion. So we're going to look at our abutment teeth and our guide planes. I'm looking at the distal of this bicuspid, the distal here, the mesial of this molar, and the mesial of these guide planes. So left to right, we look. That looks pretty balanced. I look at this angle. That looks balanced. 4 degrees of blockout, our default in this lower left setting. So let's move forward from there. Let this load, hopefully quickly. Okay, so no clasp on this tooth, just these two on the buckle. So we'll gotta get these cleaned back quick. So I will just remove the wax where we want to engage these clasps. And I'm gonna smooth right where the frame is going to meet that guide plane, because we want that major connector when we lay it in the future to lay nice and smooth. So we want that to transition up the distal here of that guide. And this tissue, I'm going to just level a little bit out there, get rid of that low spot. Same here, this is pretty rough looking rugae, so we're going to kind of level that out a little bit. Maybe a little more. I'm just using my smoothing tool here, and with my left hand I'm able to, on this razor, I'm not sure if you can see this razor tool, but on this razor keypad that's programmed for shortcuts, adjust the diameter of the tool and also the intensity that we're applying the blockout wax. All right. Maybe take off a little more right there. For our designing purposes and in-house, this X indicates that that clasp is on the gum line or on the tissue. So that's what that means to us. These red lines right here mean when we get to the major connector, we want a little more, we're going to manually add a little more thickness right in those areas, because that is kind of our, I'll say, our weaker area of the partial. You can, if you look vertically, this distance and also this distance is kind of our weaker points. It's not bad, but we'll just add a little bit, and I wanted to share what that means to us in-house. Okay, let's start with our default 0.60. These are just regular resin gap that we're going to do for our retention. I can tell this one's going to be a little bit difficult, not bad, but a little bit with this major connector coming in here and trying to fit our meshwork around that and have enough spacing. So I am going to get this all laid out, the meshwork, and then we're gonna come back to that. All right, we just need to remove or pull this back where we're actually, contacting the frame. We're not concerned about this area here because this is just being left open. I'm gonna pull back this resin gap here on this single missing tooth area as well. There we go. Oops, a little too far there. Come back. And let's go next. Okay, full upper major connector. We want to select just the first one, the major connector BDL, you should see your substructure thickness at 0.50 and your wax thickness at 0.40 and your stippling protection at 0.50. So we know that this part has the stipple, I'll say, built into it. So when we get to our, I'll say, last step, we'll see that stipple apply. And our stipple protection, if you're not familiar with that, basically is the distance. The 0.50 in this case is our setting that stipple will end before it gets to the edge or the final edge of the major connector. You'll see it like have a border or a perimeter almost. So we're just incorporating our major connector as our res. We just manually add a little bit, I'll say, where our res where we want to add material. Following this bead line, we always want to be on the, I'll say, the bottom edge of the bead line. So we're in-house, obviously before we scan this model, we're placing this physical bead line in the model. This is to help create that seal with the partial to the tissue. So I'm going to have to come off the drawing a little bit in this area here just because I need to make sure I have enough thickness. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to widen up this upright, or we're just going to have a pretty bad weak spot here if we don't have enough thickness. So following my res, I'm on the line or just a little bit past. I would rather be a little bit past than short on these rests because with finishing the partial, we need to have a little bit of extra material. By the time that partial is finished on the motors and polished and shined, we're gonna lose some of that, a little bit of distance and thickness. But our designers, they do a really good job of taking some of that into account when placing these drawings of where they need to be. Again, so on this bead line, we want to make sure we're incorporating that into the frame. In the bottom right here, this I'll say color wheel, you can toggle between your texture scan and not having your texture scan. Sometimes if you can't see the bead well and you toggle that, it'll help you see the exact location, because you want to be almost right on the edge of that. It adds no additional finishing work for us because we're really good at placing that bead line with our spline here on the software where it should be, so that our finishing crew doesn't have to adjust anything there. Same here. I'm gonna kind of jockey this out a little bit because I know this arm, this acres is gonna come in right here, so I'm gonna come out like this. I'm still like on the line, but I'm technically I could be here or like this, and I'd rather come and bring this out a little bit to meet and have a little more width and strength right there, kind of like that. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so we have an error. Major connector surface creation failed. I'm going to bet that is due to this small area with where we sometimes have trouble of this applying. So what we're going to try to do is figure out if that is in fact this part. So the one way to figure that out is, okay, let's just delete this part, go next, and then preview and see if it applies without a problem. If it does, we know that's the issue. Waiting. Come on, let's go. It's loading. There we go. Okay, so we know that single space was the issue, and that's common with, it's been forever that way with 3Shape, and I don't know exactly why. It's just a computing problem. in such a tight area. So what we're going to do is we still need to get this major connector off the tissue like it was a saddle. We're going to go to retention grids, and we're going to try and see if we can just use the resin gap and create that spacing we're looking for. Oh, so it did not really work too well. So we have a couple options here. We could take in clasping, we could take a fill piece and fill this and try to create that. Or another option would be we go back here and we actually delete this and we manually create the block out. It's not going to give us as perfect of a line on the internal finishing line, but it's going to be pretty darn good. So what we want to do is set our maximum block out height to 0.6, like our resin gap currently is on all the other two saddles. So you'll see this max out in height. Okay, then we want to define this as best we can to give it that crisp internal finishing line. So we're trying to define a hard edge. It's not going to be as perfect as your traditional resin gap, but it's going to be honestly almost unnoticeable on the final product. So we smooth this out, go ahead forward, and there we go. So if we are able to, no, we can't fade out the model at this step yet, but we can see the internal finishing line in the next step, I believe. All right, so let's just work on our clasping. We have an acres clasp. And if you're not familiar, when I lay this clasp, I'm double clicking on this last point, click, click, and that applies. Be sure you have the clasp facing the correct direction as well. If I hit reverse, you can see this too wide. They should have a taper on an acres clasp. You can see our model here does have the scribe line that our designers placed physically in the model, so you're just below that scribe. A T clasp here with the X. Obviously we want it right on the tissue. That's what the X is saying. You can actually see our pencil survey here, so our manual survey. And with this being a T clasp, we're going to add a connector from the very tip of the clasp to the other lingual arm to that tip. And then we're going to find a T-bar arm. Now, as we talked about in a previous video, this T-bar arm has the auto relief built into it. So it's going to be off the tissue 0.50 millimeters automatically. You won't see it at this step because it's built in. You'll see it at the final, because right now it looks like it's actually on the cast, but it's not, or it won't be, I should say. All right, so then we're just going to do a couple fill pieces. Oh, I think I may have screwed that up. Let's see. Yes, I clicked on fill when I was still had this part selected, so I changed it unintentionally. So we want that to be a T-bar arm. There we go. So you have to click off. You don't have it selected. Now I can go back to my fill part, select that, and let's do a little fill here and clean up this and add some strength right there. Yeah, I think the rest looks pretty good. I'll stick with that mesh work. Let's go next. All right, so in this step, we know that we're just looking more specifically at laying down our finishing line. So we're going to smooth this out here where we're going to lay that finishing line. I'm also going to add a little at this low spot here as that finishing line is going to come up this upright. And then I'm looking at this saddle. Okay, I have a high spot here. Let's remove that. A little bit of a high spot there. Knock that down. Knock that down. Get this all ready. And then let's select the smoothing tool. Let's smooth this whole thing. Keep in mind my diameter of my torch, I'll say, is fairly big. I don't want it focused. I want it kind of averaging out the area that it's smoothing. I'm going to look at my intensity here as well when I'm working. I'm kind of in that 5 to 25 range. I'm not really super aggressive when doing this because you can remove a lot quickly or too quickly. So again, knocking down those high spots and smoothing, and then I'm going to fill right underneath these acres because I know I'm going to tuck that finishing line a little bit under there and then come back with a smooth like that. All right, so let's go to our finishing lines, select those. So you can tell from this, the way the finishing line is laid, that I need to reverse that. So I right-click, reverse spline. You can tell how this, I'll say, ramps like a ramp down into the frame. This inside has, I'll say, the catch, where it's going to catch that acrylic, almost like a channel. So I taper this down widthwise, only widthwise. Vertically, I don't want to bring that down there. I don't need to. And the green line that you're seeing here is actually the internal. So if you remove the model, that green line is showing you this internal finishing line location. So where you removed and moved that resin gap, that's what that green line is indicating. And it is a good reference for laying your finishing line, but it's not the end all because it can, like here, you're gonna, your resin gap is tapering up. Well, I'm gonna kind of turn this down a little because I know when this acrylic gets added, it's gonna wrap around past this mesh and more flush with the edge of this horseshoe. So that's why I'm steering off of that line there a little bit. So we're gonna keep working on these finishing lines here. Now, if you really wanted to get really detailed on here, you could fill all these with a fill piece in the clasping step, and then at the end here, come back and punch new holes. If you wanted them all exactly perfect, you could. Maybe not too hard. Again, I'm going to taper this when I'm coming up under the clasp. Kind of tuck it right in, which is going to make it transition really nice. And then vertically, I'm going to come down just a little to get it underneath that arm. Set preview. There we go. We're going to come to our final step here of sculpting, and we have our thickness map, which is defaulting at 1 mil. So once we're seeing red we know we're at 1 millimeter in thickness. Okay, so first I have my diameter fairly wide, intensity at 15 microns, and I'm going to add just below the finishing lines without losing my define. You can see this red edge. I'm not losing that definition. I don't want to lose that definition and that detail, which is why when I'm sculpting like this, I'm looking at the white part of my mouse here, the actual pointer, and I'm keeping that, I'll say, in the valley just below the finishing line. There we go, just like that. Now we talked about earlier how this red from our designers indicate a little more thickness. I'm going to add just a little right there. Same here, I know they had one mark indicated right there. And then I'm going to look at our rests. I'm going to bring these just below green. So I'm right at that, just under 1 millimeter thickness. And if I can concave a rest, we will if we have the thickness. Bring it kind of just right up to green. Take a little bit off to find that just where I'm starting to see red. And then smooth this transition a little. We have a lot of width here, a lot of thickness, so we have good strength. Not too worried about that. I look at this arm coming in. I'm adding at 5 microns. So very, very lightly here. I'm just adding, making sure I have enough connection strength, and then blending this arm to meet the actual T clasp. That looks pretty good. I might add a little more here just to make that transition a little more smooth and tapered. I come to my holes part. 2 mil is our default. View direction, hit the plus button. There we go. And plus again. We're starting to get pretty squishy here. I'm going to have to drop down to 1.5. And I don't want to be near this arm. I don't want to lose this strength where it's coming in. So this I'm going to favor to this side. Like that. This has still got a good connection. We're good there. All right, hit the paintbrush. We look at our stipple, and because we used our major connector for our rest and everything, that's why we're seeing stipple within here. So we're going to remove like this. We're going to come off of our aprons as well, just a little bit. Just like that. Let's go next. Going to select our tissue stop. Our default, as always, 3 mil on these metal cases. Same in the anterior here. We have a tissue stop marked with the red from our designer. We get our pattern height at 0.08 and our line spacer at 0.050, our default. Let's hit preview. Loading, loading, loading. That's a 3Shape game. How fast can you keep it loading? It's 70%, almost there. All right, let's fade this. Take a look. I hit S's and Sam to remove the model as a shortcut. You can see now, see how this is, we manually blocked that out at our internal finishing line. It's defined, but it's not like our resin gap line. That's really hard, like almost a 90-degree angle. But it's a pretty good workaround. You're going to have those struggles in the single tooth areas. That's very common. So you have those three options to try to do to make it work. So hopefully that was helpful. I've seen a lot of questions on that in the past. So until next time, I'm going to close this one out, but we'll see you.